The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet streets of Westbrook Heights, a peaceful suburb known more for its manicured lawns and HOA rules than for acts of confrontation. 16-year-old Trey Johnson walked the familiar path home, earbuds in backpack slung casually over one shoulder. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just cutting through the same route he had walked since middle school, but this day would turn out differently. As he crossed Oak Ridge Lane, a black and white cruiser slowly rolled up beside him, its siren silent, but its presence unmistakably loud. Officer Brian Carter stepped out, adjusting his utility belt with the kind of deliberate motion that announced power more than protection. Carter called out to Trey, asking what he was doing in the area, despite having likely seen the boy many times before. Trey raised with manners and a deep respect for authority, especially from his mother. Denise paused his music and responded politely, explaining he lived just 3 blocks away, but his calm tone seemed to annoy Carter more than anything else. The officer pressed further, asking for ID, questioning why Trey was wearing a hoodie, and even implying that he looked out of place for the neighborhood. Trey, suppressing his frustration, tried to keep things peaceful, even when Carter made a sarcastic remark about just making sure someone's not casing houses. Then came the moment that turned condescending into hostile. Carter asked about Trey's parents. Trey, proud yet cautious, mentioned that his father was serving in special forces. The moment the words left his mouth, Carter scoffed openly, saying something like, "Oh, so now you're a military brat too." The mockery wasn't just dismissive, it was layered with the type of disbelief reserved for those who think they already know who someone is by the color of their skin. Trey didn't respond to the jab. He just stood there, eyes forward, chest high, letting silence do the talking where words might inflame. A few feet away, tucked behind a large oak tree on the corner, stood Lila Brooks. She had seen the patrol car slow down and recognized Trey from school. Her instincts kicked in, not out of rebellion, but out of a quiet sense that something wasn't right. She pulled out her phone and hit record. The officer's tone, his posture, his questions, they all told a story louder than any siren. She didn't know Trey well, but she knew injustice when she saw it. As she filmed, her hands shook slightly, not from fear of being caught, but from anger that this kind of thing was still happening right here in their nice neighborhood. As Carter continued questioning, Trey Lila captured nearly 10 minutes of footage, including the moment when Carter pretended to laugh off the boy's comment about his father's military service. She'd later replay that part several times, noticing the way Trey's face changed, not to anger, but to something more painful, the look of someone who realized he would have to prove his worth more than anyone else ever would when Carter finally let Trey go, warning him to stay where he belonged. Lila stopped recording and quietly followed at a distance until she saw him safely reach his driveway. That night, Lila uploaded the video privately, unsure of what to do next. But deep down, she knew something bigger had just started. For Trey, it was another reminder of the fight his mother had warned him about. For Lila, it was the beginning of an awakening she couldn't ignore, and for Officer Carter, it was a moment that, unbeknownst to him, would spark consequences far beyond a routine stop. That evening, the Johnson household pulsed with a quiet tension, the kind that lingered even after the front door had closed and the lights were dimmed. Denise Johnson sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cooling mug of chamomile tea, her eyes scanning Trey's face as he recounted every detail of the encounter with Officer Carter. She was a hospital administrator, calm under pressure, always poised, but tonight her worry broke through the practiced composure. She nodded as Trey described how the officer had mocked him, how the mention of his father's military service had triggered a visible change in the cop's demeanor. Denise didn't interrupt, but the moment he finished, she leaned in with a seriousness that caught Trey off guard. "Trey," she said quietly, "you can never mention your father's real job. Ever." You know that her voice was firm, but laced with fear. It wasn't just about privacy, it was about protection. Marcus Johnson. Trey's father wasn't just in the Special Forces. His assignments had long crossed into classified territory, the kind of operations that didn't show up in public records or patriotic recruitment posters. Denise had spent years carefully building a normal life for her son, moving them to a peaceful suburb, registering Trey under her maiden name, and always insisting that questions about Marcus be answered vaguely. It wasn't shame that kept her silent. It was survival. But Trey, just 16, hadn't yet learned how heavy the burden of secrecy could be. Trey lowered his eyes, guilt tightening in his chest. "I didn't mean to mess up," he said. I didn't want him thinking you raised me alone. I didn't want him thinking Dad walked out." There was no bitterness in his voice, just the quiet dignity of a boy who had grown up with an invisible hero and needed others to know he wasn't fatherless. Pride had gotten the best of him, and for once he had wanted to speak Marcus's name aloud, as if that would lend him the respect he'd been denied on the sidewalk. Denise reached across the table and held his hand. "You're not wrong to be proud. But in this world, son, some truths are dangerous, and your father's truth is one of them." Meanwhile, just a few miles away, Officer Brian Carter sat in his patrol car, long after his shift had ended, staring at the report he had filed earlier. The kid had been respectful, polite, even articulate, and yet something about him had rubbed Carter the wrong way. It wasn't just the mention of the military father, it was the way the boy held himself, how he looked him straight in the eye without flinching. Carter wasn't used to that. Not from teenagers, not from black boys. The more he thought about it, the more he felt threatened, though he wouldn't admit it to himself. He replayed the dashcam footage on the patrol tablet, zooming in on Trey's face, pausing at the moment he said, "My father's in special forces." The phrase looped in Carter's mind like a song stuck on repeat. Something about it felt off, like a bluff he wanted to call. He opened his laptop and began searching public military records, scrolling through every Johnson he could find. The results were inconclusive, and that only deepened his obsession. He wasn't concerned with national security or community safety. This was personal. Carter needed to feel superior again, and Trey's quiet confidence had cracked something in him that wouldn't easily heal. What kind of teenager looked back at a police officer without fear? Who raised a kid like that? Back at home, Trey stood in his bedroom staring at the single-framed photo of his father, an image taken years ago during a rare family visit. Marcus was in uniform, his smile solemn, his hand resting gently on Trey's shoulder. It was the only physical memory he had of the man who had missed birthdays, graduations and basketball games for reasons wrapped in silence and sealed orders. That night, Trey whispered an apology to the photo, promising not to speak out again, but deep down he also vowed never to shrink himself in the face of injustice. He couldn't erase what had happened, but he could choose how to carry it. And as Carter continued digging through files, frustrated by the silence surrounding Marcus Johnson's name, he didn't realize he had crossed a line, one that would eventually expose not only his own biases, but the full weight of the truth he'd underestimated. Whispers turned into full-blown rumors by the time Trey walked into homeroom. Monday morning, what had begun as a tense sidewalk exchange had quickly transformed into the latest obsession of the school gossip chain. Students passed around versions of the story like a hot commodity, some exaggerated, some outright false. He said his dad's a Navy SEAL, one boy claimed. "No, I heard it was CIA." A girl added, eyes wide with speculation, but among the loudest voices was Dylan Scott, a senior known more for his arrogance than his grades. During lunch, Dylan strutted over to Trey's table, flanked by a few boys who enjoyed his cruel jokes. "So Dylan sneered loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear your dad some top-secret war hero. Huh, must be nice, having an imaginary dad." The laughter that followed cut deeper than any insult. Trey clenched his fists under the table, choosing silence over reaction. That was how his mother had taught him composure over chaos, but inside he burned, not just from the humiliation, but from the helplessness. He couldn't defend his father without exposing him. He couldn't prove anything without betraying secrets. It was a trap. Dylan knew he couldn't escape. Just when the tension felt unbearable, a voice interrupted. "Back off, Dylan. You don't know anything." Lila Brooks stepped between them, holding up her phone. "I've got the video from that night. You want to see who really looked like a fool?" The cafeteria quieted, slightly surprised by her boldness. Dylan backed away with a scoff, but not before muttering, "Whatever. Just keep pretending." Later that afternoon, Lila pulled Trey aside. They sat under a tree near the track field, away from prying eyes. She showed him the video again, Officer Carter's tone, the condescending smirk, Trey's calm voice defending his father. "This isn't just bullying," she said. "This is wrong. If things get worse, my dad can help. He's dealt with cases like this before." Trey nodded slowly, grateful but still unsure how far he wanted to go. Lila wasn't just offering help. She was offering a path that might unravel everything his mother had worked so hard to protect. Still, it was the first time in days he didn't feel alone. Meanwhile, Officer Carter sat in the dim light of his home office, fixated on the screen before him. His searches had turned up nothing concrete on Marcus Johnson, only a basic military registration that ended abruptly with the rest redacted. Redacted. A word that made Carter's skin crawl. He had access to personnel files, deployment histories, even some high-clearance police databases. But when he tried to dig deeper into Marcus's background, he hit classified walls. It only fueled his frustration. "Who the hell is this guy?" he muttered. He wasn't just curious anymore. He was obsessed. The idea that a teenager could walk past him with that much confidence and back it up with a father hidden behind government silence gnawed at his pride. What Officer Carter didn't realize was that every search he initiated, every flagged query about Marcus Johnson was being logged. Somewhere deep within a federal database, an alert had already been triggered, and silent eyes were beginning to watch not Trey, but Carter. His persistent digging had started to raise questions far above his pay grade, but Carter, too, wrapped in his ego and insecurity, saw none of it. He was chasing control, chasing validation, and he was willing to cross any line to get it. Back at school, the video Lila had shared slowly spread among trusted classmates. Some were shocked, others indifferent, but a few began to rally quietly around Trey. They saw something that Dylan couldn't understand, a strength rooted in grace, a boy who didn't need to shout to be heard. Trey noticed the shift, subtle as it was. A nod in the hallway, a seat saved in class. He wasn't looking to be a hero. He just didn't want to be invisible. And as Carter pushed deeper into forbidden territory, Trey's quiet resistance began to ripple outward, becoming something bigger than either of them expected. Night fell quietly over the Johnson household, but inside, Denise paced the living room with her phone pressed tight to her ear. She had sent Trey to bed early after yet another stressful day, filled with whispers at school and tense glances from neighbors. Unknown to her, thousands of miles away, Marcus Johnson had already been briefed on everything. His commanding officer had handed him a folder, stamped "Confidential, Domestic Incident." Inside were surveillance notes, Carter's flagged searches, and a transcript of the sidewalk encounter. Without hesitation, Marcus requested emergency leave and boarded a military transport plane bound for home. No one outside his chain of command knew he was returning, not even Denise. But his mission was clear now: to protect his family, not from foreign enemies, but from the ones who wore the same uniform he once honored. Under the cover of Night Officer Brian Carter crouched in the bushes behind the Johnson house, glancing around nervously before slipping a crowbar into the shed's latch. Every ounce of this was illegal, but he convinced himself it was justified. "He's hiding something." "I know it," he whispered, breath fogging in the cold air. Inside the shed, dust clung to untouched boxes, gardening tools, and an old army duffel bag tucked in the corner. Carter's hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a metal box locked shut. He forced it open and found what he'd been hunting: a black and white photo of Marcus Johnson in combat gear. No rank insignia, no name tag, standing beside men whose faces were blurred. The background was arid and lifeless, Middle East perhaps, but what rattled Carter wasn't the photo. It was the silence it screamed. No identifiers, no record. This man wasn't just a soldier, he was a ghost. That same moment, Marcus stepped through the front door of his home, boots silent against the hardwood floor, Denise froze mid-sentence as the phone slipped from her hand. "Marcus," she whispered, unsure if she was dreaming. He nodded once and embraced her tightly. "I came as fast as I could," he said, voice low but steady. When she finally pulled back, her face hardened. "You picked a hell of a time to come home. Carter's not just harassing Trey anymore. He broke into our shed tonight." Marcus's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He had always believed in order in protocol, but this was personal. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was a declaration, and Marcus knew exactly what lines Carter had crossed the next morning. Denise filed an official complaint with the police department. She met with Captain Lewis, a seasoned lawman with 30 years of clean service under his belt. At first, he seemed skeptical. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Rubbing his temple, Denise handed over surveillance footage from their backyard camera. It clearly showed Carter prying open the shed and rummaging through its contents. Lewis's face changed instantly. This is criminal trespassing. Possibly worse," Denise added. "And our son is a minor. Carter's fixation isn't just unprofessional, it's dangerous." Captain Lewis buttoned his jacket and nodded. "He's suspended, effective immediately, and there will be a formal investigation." For the first time in days, Denise exhaled. Officer Carter's badge and gun were taken that afternoon. He said nothing as he turned them over, but the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. He didn't see consequences. He saw betrayal. To him, the system was shielding a man who had mocked him and a kid who had undermined his authority. As he was escorted out, he muttered, "You'll regret protecting him." What Carter didn't understand was that Marcus hadn't needed protection. Not from bullies, not from ignorance, but Denise Trey and the truth they did. And now Marcus was home watching Waiting Ready. Later that night, Trey woke up to find his father sitting on the porch. The stars overhead twinkled like distant eyes. Trey hesitated, then joined him. "You came back," he whispered. Marcus placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "I never left you, son." "Not really." For the first time, Trey felt safe, not because his father was a soldier, but because he had chosen to fight for something even greater than a mission his family. And with Carter out of the picture, at least for now, a fragile sense of peace returned to their quiet suburb, though everyone knew the real battle for justice had just begun. It was a Friday afternoon, and students at Ridgeway High were trickling out of their final class, buzzing with weekend plans. Trey Johnson was gathering his books when the air shifted. Whispers rose. Then a tense silence fell as former officer Brian Carter stormed into the hallway, still in partial uniform despite his suspension, his eyes locked on Trey with unhinged intensity. "You," he barked, pointing. "You're coming with me." Students froze. Trey blinked, stunned, unsure whether this was a joke. Carter lunged forward and grabbed his backpack strap. "You're under arrest for obstruction, lying to law enforcement, and impersonating military connections." Teachers rushed to intervene. Mr. Daniels, the gym coach, stepped between them. "He's a minor." "You're not even on duty." But Carter wouldn't let go. "This kid is dangerous," he shouted. Trey, visibly shaken, tried to stay calm, echoing what his mother always said. "Hold your ground with dignity, not rage." Among the students watching was Lila Brooks' phone already recording. Her hands trembled, but her instincts kicked in. She hit the live stream button on her social media app, capturing every second of the chaos as Carter tried to drag Trey through the hallway. Students began shouting, teachers pleading, "You're not allowed here, Brian," someone yelled. But the former officer didn't care. It wasn't about the law anymore. It was about pride. Lila's video feed exploded within minutes, her comment section flooding with outrage. "Is this even legal?" One comment read, "That's abuse of power." Wrote another. Parents watching from home began calling the school. Activists began tagging the local news. Within an hour, the footage had been shared over 100,000 times. What started as one man's grudge was now a national conversation. By sunset, the police station parking lot was swarming. Protesters held signs that read, Protect our kids, not your ego and accountability. Now news vans formed a wall across the entrance, their cameras capturing the boiling frustration of a community that had been quietly simmering for years. Denise Johnson stood in the crowd, arms crossed tightly, her face unreadable. She had warned the department. She had provided the evidence. Now it was no longer just about her son. It was about every child who had ever been wrongly targeted, about every parent who had been ignored. A chant began to rise, no justice, no peace. The chief of police, Captain Lewis, stepped out onto the station steps, trying to calm the storm, but the people wanted more than words. They wanted change and justice now. As the media clamoured outside, a black SUV pulled into the station's rear entrance. Marcus Johnson stepped out, dressed not in camouflage, but in a crisp black jacket. His posture calm but commanding, he walked through the front doors of the precinct without hesitation, flanked by a quiet aide from the Department of Defense. "I'm here to speak to Captain Lewis," he said, handing over a sealed envelope marked with a federal crest. Inside were legal documents, sealed orders, and a formal demand. All records of Brian Carter's actions, surveillance arrest attempts, digital searches must be handed over immediately. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The presence he carried said everything. Behind him, the voices outside grew louder, and the truth stood taller. Inside the captain's office, Marcus laid the file on the desk. "This isn't just about my son," he began. "This is about a man who violated the law under the illusion of protecting it." Captain Lewis, clearly rattled by the public response, nodded. "We've launched an internal review. I've already spoken to the mayor." Marcus replied evenly. "And I'll be speaking to the DOJ." The power dynamics had shifted. No longer was Marcus the invisible ghost from Black Ops files. He was now a father reclaiming control, backed not just by his experience, but by public will. And in that moment, the walls of protection that had long shielded men like Carter began to crumble. Meanwhile, back at school, Trey sat quietly in the counselor's office. Lila sat beside him, her hand still clutching her phone. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, though the weight of everything that happened was still sinking in. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "I just told the truth." Lila gave a small smile. "And you're not alone anymore." Outside, the world was watching. The lines had been drawn, but with voices rising, cameras rolling, and truth now in plain sight, one thing was certain: Trey wasn't the one on trial anymore. In the days following the viral confrontation at Ridgeway High, rumors swirled beyond the town lines. News anchors questioned how a suspended officer could stage an attempted arrest on school grounds. Opinion pieces dissected racial profiling in affluent suburbs. But quietly behind the scenes, another narrative was emerging, one that not even the local authorities fully understood. Marcus Johnson had never been a retiree, nor just a proud father. His entire presence in that quiet neighborhood had been part of an ongoing, undisclosed special forces operation involving surveillance of an international target embedded deep within the community. For years he had lived in plain sight, cutting the lawn, attending PTA meetings, and dropping off his son while coordinating missions with federal agencies from a hidden communications hub. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the ghost on the chessboard moving in shadows with the Pentagon on speed dial. But Officer Brian Carter, now disgraced and suspended, couldn't let it go. The humiliation, the national backlash, and most of all the secrecy surrounding Marcus ate at him like a virus. He spent sleepless nights poring over fragments of redacted documents, photos from security cameras, and hearsay from old veterans at the local bar. He became convinced that Marcus wasn't just some government man. He imagined espionage arms, trafficking foreign allegiances, obsessed with proving his instincts right. Carter recruited a handful of like-minded off-duty officers, each with a bone to pick and loyalty only to themselves. They weren't acting under any badge now. What they planned was unlawful, and it would be their final mistake. Late one night, the group approached the Johnson home, dressed in black, armed and coordinated over burner radios. They bypassed the security lights and cut through the backyard, unaware that they were already being watched. inside what looked like a common garden. Shed was a biometric sensor. Once triggered, it sent a silent ping to a remote server where Marcus, stationed in a secure federal location, had eyes on every corner of the house. He had prepared for this. From the moment Trey was harassed, Marcus had anticipated escalation. With a few keystrokes, he activated a silent lockdown protocol security shutters. Engaged surveillance feeds went live to federal agents on standby, and an unmarked SUV began its route toward the house. As Carter's team breached the back door, they were greeted not by frightened homeowners, but by a silent hallway and a subtle blinking light near the stairwell, an indication that their presence had been logged and transmitted. Within moments, red and blue strobes flooded the street, but not from local cruisers. These were federal units, accompanied by tactical teams in unmarked gear, weapons trained but restrained. Carter and his team were disarmed in seconds, confused and outmatched. Agents identified themselves not to the men, but to the surveillance camera mounted above the mantel, Operation Shield secured. Target neutralized. Awaiting further instruction, one agent reported, from his remote location, Marcus remained calm. He had warned Denise and Trey in advance, quietly relocating them to a safe house once Carter had shown signs of instability. Now, as the trespassers were loaded into secure vans and agents combed through their illegal weaponry, Marcus forwarded a classified report to his commanding officer. It detailed Carter's breach, his escalating threats, and the compromise to ongoing federal activities. It included evidence video logs and psychological profiles compiled by DoD analysts. Within hours, a formal order was issued. Brian Carter's law enforcement certifications were permanently revoked. He was flagged on every domestic watch list and barred from possessing a firearm. By morning, the town was abuzz again, but this time with confusion and silence. Local police issued vague statements. Neighbors saw federal vehicles, but heard no explanations. The Johnson home appeared normal, yet eerily still. Trey and Denise were absent, having begun temporary relocation under protective services, and Marcus, he remained a ghost mission, intact, presence erased. But one thing had become undeniable. He was never just someone's father. He was the man they never saw coming, the man no one could touch, the protector in the shadows who had warned them all with silence. If this story moved, you don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more powerful stories that reveal hidden truths and challenge the status quo. Share this video with someone who believes in justice, dignity, and the quiet strength of those who protect from the shadows. And if you have thoughts or personal experiences to share, leave a comment below. We read every single one. Let's keep the conversation going and shine a light on stories that deserve to be heard.